0.5% of neuroscience data, 0.5% is done in women. I get super frustrated on one side because I'm like, of course people are confused, but then I'm a glass half full kind of girl. I see it as an amazing opportunity to start to do some really good science. I've got good training, I've got these connections in these two worlds, and I feel like we can really start to bring everything together to give people, and women especially, the answers that they're looking for.
Hey, everybody. We've had some of the most incredible guests coming to you these past couple of months. The amount of expertise and knowledge on these cutting edge topics is something we really hope that you enjoy. And if you do, it would make a huge difference to us if you could rate, review, and subscribe the podcast. It helps us to get more guests, better experts, and talk about all of the things that are really important to you. So give us a love, give us a lot of love, and don't forget to subscribe so you get all our new episodes. Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Rachel, and I have with me today another Rachel. Rachele Pojednic is yes. I was a little nervous, and then I had it, and then I didn't. Rachele, you are a human performance and healthy aging researcher. Okay, everybody's paying attention now. What are the two things we want most? Like human performance and enhancing it, and aging in a way that is full of health and not restrictions. So, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
My absolute pleasure. Thrilled to be here.
I just want to give a little bit of your background because you have an incredibly impressive one sheet with all of the things that you have accomplished. You are the CEO and founder of Strong Process Education and the Director of Scientific Research at Restore Hyper Wellness. You hold a faculty appointment at Stanford. You are a research associate at the Institute of Lifestyle Medicine at Harvard Medical School, and you got your PhD in nutritional biochemistry from Tufts University. Amazing school, tough mascot.
The jumbo, I know.
I remember playing them and being like, that's tough. That's tough. You completed your postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Medical, and you have extensive research in nutrition, supplementation, and physical activity interventions on muscle physiology. I can't think of a more ideal guest to talk to our audience about all of their burning questions surrounding all of the incredible research you've done. You are a published, what you've done in this field is so cutting edge that I really am so excited to let you give our listeners some of the most recent research in this field because it's really super exciting.
I'm so glad that you see from the outside looking in that this seems very leading edge and exciting, because for the past 15, 20 years, I've been like, what am I doing? Nobody else is doing this. I'm like blazing this path out here that didn't really catch on until recently. People didn't really get it when I said I wanted to connect, health and fitness and that world. And I wanted to connect with academia because these two worlds just live in silos. And finally, it is catching on that people want to know what works. What does the research say? What about healthy aging and muscle and longevity? What about women's health? And so finally, I feel like all of these dots are connecting that I've been sort of, growing and feeding throughout the years. So I'm super psyched to be here talking to you about what works, what doesn't, and how we can all use the therapies around us to help us age well.
Oh, that is the dream. That is the goal. And in both of these fields, as you said, that have lived as silos for so many years. We have, the medical side that focuses so much on treatment once something has presented. And then we have the health side, which has got a lot of snake oil, if we're being honest, and everybody's out there selling something. So the combination of these two things by a really trusted and your background as a doctor is so incredibly impressive that I really love the thought of bringing these two fields together, and you're just doing such important work.
Well, thank you so much. It has been and continues to be a labor of love. These two worlds are just like reverse magnets to each other, right? Like they just repel one another. But like I said, I think people are starting to come around that we do need to talk to each other because for the longest time, we had this real vacuum of information from the scientific side of the house. And it wasn't that the data wasn't there, although we're working on it. We have a lot of work to do still. But because we, at the sort of academic scientific side, I like to say, suck at Instagram, there are all of these wellness folks that, to be completely honest, yes, it's snake oily, but I honestly believe at the heart of hearts in the wellness and fitness industry, it is very well intentioned, right? Like people are looking for an answer. There is a clear vacuum that they provide and fill. And so, it's really trying to get good information to the movers and shakers that are actually talking to people and helping the scientists figure out how to communicate their work better because without that level of, making really complicated science easy to understand, we're going to continue down this path of repelling magnets.
I've heard from so many women that their initial deep dive into the world of wellness or health or just biohacking, anything where they're trying to enhance what's going on in their body, they just come up against this wall of either I'm trusting an influencer who, as you said, I'm so glad you said that because I really do truly think these people have found something that works for them and are just wanting to shout it from the rooftops. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work for everyone, right? Everyone doesn't have the same goals but when people come in initially make their descent into this, they go oh my god, do I need a doctorate? I can either have 50 influencers telling me what to do that have no background in science, or I can sit here reading medical article after medical article that I don't understand. And it just feels frustrating. And a lot of people give up at that point.
And I think you're tapping into something also that's super important is yes, we could dive deep into the medical literature, which is dry. It's, white papers and dry toast, really, right? Like it's so hard to figure it out. And then tease out, is this useful for me, right? Like this study done in rats? Is it done in men? Is it done in, a population that has a disease that I don't have? And so there's a lot of nuance that goes into reading science that can make it so challenging. And then I'll add a layer onto it because you said specifically women in the work that I do in the sort of like performance side of healthy aging. When you look at women in the literature, we see that as of current count, depending on exactly where you look, there is somewhere between 6 and about 18-20% of the data in women. That's it. The rest is done in men. And so, this idea that we can take all of this science, and even if you do understand how to read it and comb through it and understand the statistics, applying it to a female body is really challenging because in many cases it's going to be the same. It'll probably work out the same, but in some cases it's going to be dramatically different. There's a big conversation right now happening about the menstrual cycle and changes between peri and postmenopause, and that's certainly not going to apply to a male body, right? And so if we have a lack of data in addition to a lack of an ability to really understand that data, this is where the vacuum really starts to take hold. And people, as you mentioned, that are really well intentioned that say, hey, I found this thing that works for me. Let me share it because there isn't any other information out there. And this is where this cycle begins.
Oh, you're so I've never heard that statistic before, but it's like blows me away.
I
It
want to give
blows
you,
me away.
if that one blows you away, let me give you one more. So we are all kind of, at least I'm looking at you and me and kind of in this like, peri post menopause world right now, right? And we all know it comes with the brain fog, the mental health kind of, have I always had anxiety? Like what is happening to me right now? The more horrible statistic is when you look at neuroscience and brain statistics, we see that 0.5% of neuroscience data, 0.5% is done in women. 0.5. So this is where, I get super frustrated on one side because I'm like, of course people are confused. But then I'm a glass half full kind of girl, Rachel. So I see it as an amazing opportunity to start to do some really good science at a moment in my career where, I've got good training, I've got these connections in these two worlds, and I feel like we can really start to bring everything together to give people and women especially the answers that they're looking for.
Oh, thank you for that. And honestly, the underrepresentation there and the fact that you, as you mentioned, are sort of hitting this point in your life simultaneously, it really drives some some of the best experts that we have talked to on the podcast are essentially coming from a place of I needed these answers for myself. And that led me to some incredible findings. And I really want to deep dive into this because, so much of when women start looking at the idea of healthy aging or not, um, we are in this place where these changes are happening. And as you said, underrepresented in science in these studies of women at this point in their life. So, um, you are an expert in whole body cryotherapy. Now, I know that you have done extensive amounts of research on lots of therapies, but I want to deep dive into cryo for a second because I think it's having a moment, right? It's hot. Oh my god, I
Yeah,
did
right.
that. I
Yep.
did it. Oh my god, I wasn't gonna do that. I was
So hot it's cold. Yeah.
all right, so can you first of all, let's talk about cryotherapy as if we're a 5-year-old, never heard of it, have no idea what it is or who it's for.
Sure. So the idea here is that when we look at cold therapy, there are a lot of different ways to get cold, right? So you can go outside on a cold day. I lived in New England for my entire career up until very recently, and it's frigid in, the middle of January or the middle of February. So that's one way you can do it. You can get in a cold shower, right? Like you can just turn the cold shower on, stand below it. You can do cold plunging, which is really hot right now. So either it's a tub in your backyard or it is a river that's freezing, or you can use some technology like cryotherapy, which is a big machine that either uses nitrogen or electricity to make the interior super cold. And so, one of the first things that we want to call out here is that there are varying levels of cold from an actual temperature perspective, right? So, if you look at, for example, the first few ways to get cold that I gave you, going outside on a cold day, taking a cold shower, getting into a cold plunge, that's actually fairly warm cold, right? Because at the end of the day, it can't be colder than, especially in the water ones, it can't be colder than freezing, actual freezing, because the water turns to ice, right? When you look at cryotherapy, we get into incredibly cold temperatures, right? Like it is frigidly cold. And these kinds of cold therapies are all going to have a slightly different effect on your body because the temperature itself or the length of time that you can spend in it before you go hypothermic, right? And so when we look at cold therapies that are having to do with water, usually the ways that these are going to work is they're going to reduce your core temperature. And so that has systemic implications for inflammation, for brain health and mental health. With cryotherapy, what we're actually seeing is you're not in the chamber for long enough to actually really significantly reduce your core temperature. So we're seeing the effects as slightly different. It's actually happening just below the surface of your skin and through this sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system where you get in and you're like, blah, it's freezing. Um, and so when we look at these therapies, we have to be really, really thoughtful that these are not comparing apples to apples, even if they are both cold. So that's the first thing that we want to sort of level set on here. The other thing that's really interesting about cryotherapy, for the most part, is as you mentioned just a second, it's whole body, which means your neck and head get in too, which also has a different effect than if you cold plunge, which is typically from the shoulders down, or even some cases from the waist down, if you're just going to go stand in a cold river or something. So, all of these nuances actually have different effects on your body, which is what we're trying to tease out right now in the literature.
A little surprise for all my mamas out there. You are so loved and so appreciated. And at Constantly Very Gear this year, we want you to know our Mother's Day sale is going on right now, and you can get some really great deals along with some amazing new Mother's Day shirts. Some funny, bruh. For the boy moms, you hear me, boy moms. You know what I'm talking about, bruh. I am so appreciative of anyone who is on this journey of motherhood, and we want to show you how appreciative we are with some great sales. So get to constantlyvariedgear.com today and take advantage of some of the Mother's Day sales. I had a question on cold plunge comparatively, and what you said makes total sense. The head and the neck being involved is I could see definitely being a game changer as far as what you're going to see, and the freezing point of water. That's a great intro, I think. To we've got some very exciting research findings from looking at cryotherapy as a way to reduce inflammation. And I think that, one of the things in the health industry right now is inflammation is a hot word. It's being linked to so many different ailments that a lot of scientists are finding they're all coming back to the same root cause of inflammation in manifesting in so many different ways. Can you talk about, you published a study, it's called Whole Body Cryotherapy Reduces Systemic Inflammation in Healthy Adults. Can you talk about this study, your findings, and maybe like why this is so exciting?
Yeah. So you are hitting on a buzzword that I think is critically important and really worth teasing out a little bit of nuance as well. So when we look at cryotherapy, as you mentioned, we did this study. It was a pilot, so it was a small study that we were looking at. It was 15 people, half were female. So really important. Actually, a little bit more than half were female. 9 out of the 15 were women. Um, and what you're saying here that's really important is this idea of low grade, or even in some cases, higher grade chronic inflammation, right? And this is really important. So it's funny when you are a scientist, they will often say, don't study healthy people because you won't see any change, right? So if I give healthy people cryotherapy, the likelihood that they get healthier is probably not going to happen because it's hard to make healthy healthier, right? So typically in the research, what we do is we look at a diseased population that we know is going to have this higher level of chronic inflammation. So if you look at the diseases of our time, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, all of these diseases, if you look at the blood work of people that have been diagnosed with these diseases, they have higher grade chronic inflammation. We looked at healthy people because we had a suspicion that these folks, even though they were manifesting as healthy on the outside, they were pretty active, they were eating a pretty decent diet. We also looked at their blood work and said, hey, it's interesting. Their inflammatory levels are not high in the sense of disease yet, but they're a little bit higher than we would necessarily want them to be, which is one of these sort of like early indicators of things potentially going sideways in the future. And so we took these folks, and this was a retrospective design. So we looked backwards at people that had been using cryotherapy for a long period of time. And what we found is the major outcome was that we saw reductions in a really important marker of chronic inflammation, which is called high sensitivity CRP, C reactive protein. And this is a protein that is related to things like heart attack, if you look at it, and it's like really spiked up. And so this is something that is just sort of like chronically circulating around. And if it's high, then it indicates that you've got either some disease or disease risk. And so what we saw is that after using the cryotherapy for a long period of time, so we followed them for upwards of several months, we found that if they consistently, and this is the trick that's really important, if they consistently used cryotherapy, we found an average of about 6 to 7 times per month. So it's about 1 to 2 times per week. We saw significant reductions, clinically and statistically significant reductions in their high sensitivity CRP number. So what does this tell us is this is potentially a good way to sort of fend off some of these chronic conditions that go along with chronic elevated inflammation. And one thing that's really fun, I know we talked a little bit earlier about how you're like, I don't know how I feel about the cold. The thing is, it's actually really fun to do cryotherapy. You get in the chamber at one of our studios, they're pumping a song that you have asked for. It's 3 minutes. You're in this like really funny garb of like hats and mittens and, like robes and stuff. And you're just in this crazy cool chamber. There's like mist all over you, and you're just dancing and having a really fun time. And you get out and you're just like, I feel amazing. Like you just keep dancing. So I think there's something there that goes along with the cryotherapy too, is it's not like a traditional medical therapy where it's like, here, take this pill. It's like, hey, go and spend 3 minutes of pure exhilaration. And I suspect that there's something going on there too.
That is so interesting. I have never experienced it myself, and if I'm gonna be honest, that is not the way I pictured it. I definitely pictured it as like a cold hell where you're just like crying before you get in and you're like, please don't make me go, and like begging people to have mercy. So that is a really, I'm really glad you gave us that little look into what happens at your studio because that is so funny.
So
Um,
let me tap into that too, because I am with you, Rachel. If people ask me to get into cold water, like I am the person that is just, either on the side of the river or the pool or whatever it is, I'm like easing myself in, like screaming, like, please don't make me do this. Like, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. But cryotherapy is so fun and it's so fast. You're only in for 3 minutes. That it's actually like this thing that you really look forward to. And I know people really love their cold plunge. And we should also, in a second, we should probably tap into the differences in inflammation changes between cryotherapy and cold plunge.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk to you about besides chronic inflammation. I wanted you to maybe hit on a couple of the other health benefits that people could expect to see from cryotherapy, and then that's a perfect segue to how is this differing from a cold plunge? Because I'm telling you right now, there is no way. There is no way. I'm not doing it. Like I also lived in New England all my life, Rachel. We are like kindred souls.
Get out of here.
I moved to South Florida. That is how much I can't do it. Like, there are people that are uncomfortable in the cold, and then there's me. And I'm not, and I have a very high pain tolerance. It's not that. It's just, it ain't for me.
Yep, I hear that. I totally hear that. We gotta get you in a chamber. You'll have a totally different experience.
I have a renewed sense of hope because I was kind of feeling a little bit like I was going to leave feeling like I know I have to do this. I know this is great for me, but I'm sorry I have to choose me this time. So, okay, so I want to give you a chance beside, of course, that's a huge besides because that is everything, chronic inflammation. But besides that, what are we looking at for health benefits when we use a cryo chamber regularly, consistently?
Yeah, totally. So this is actually really interesting. When you look at the body of literature, you'll actually find a fair amount of research on cryotherapy as opposed to cold water immersion. So that's, the cold water swimmers, this is the cold plunge. There's not much on cold plunge specifically right now. The majority of the data is in cold water swimmers. We'll come back to that in a second. When we look at the cryotherapy data, this is fascinating. The majority of the data that is coming out right now is actually coming out of Poland, which is fascinating because I learned this when I started working at Restore and started pivoting some of my research into cryotherapy. The Polish Health Administration actually covers cryotherapy as a medical therapy. So, yeah, so it's really fascinating the amount of researchers that are doing work in that particular country. And
Wow.
so, as you start to take a deeper dive, if you look at our data, again, preliminary, we're starting to see some markers of metabolism improving. So, we actually had this hypothesis that if you could improve metabolism, you would then improve inflammation. And it's a bit of a chicken or the egg kind of question, is improving the inflammation, improving the metabolism, or vice versa. We're going to tease that out. We also see in the literature, not our data, but in this, most of the data that's coming out of Poland, is that there is a significant effect on mental health and anxiety, depression, these kinds of mental health issues. And there's a lot of suspicion as to why that could potentially be happening. One of the ones that we are really seeing, and this would apply both to cryotherapy and to cold plunge, as we have described, when you get into this freezing cold space, you're often like, "Wah!" Like, your sympathetic nervous system goes crazy. And if you want to stay in this cold place, whether it's frigidly cold in cryotherapy or you're immersed into a water bath, the thing that you have to do is take big, huge, measured deep breaths, which automatically takes the foot off the gas of the sympathetic nervous system, lets the parasympathetic nervous system, which everybody's talking about right now, vagus nerve, vagal tone, start to take over. And you almost force this relaxation response in your body. And my suspicion is that the reduction of this inflammation, in addition to this very forced relaxation response, that combination is probably key for a lot of these mental health outcomes that we're seeing. So, if I was to sort of wrap it up, I'd say reduced inflammation, improved metabolism, early days, but looking good. And then mental health are probably the things that we're seeing with these cold therapies.
So I have to ask because it's what one of the other buzzwords that we keep hearing is cortisol and how the feeling of stress is perceived by your body, what's released, how your body interprets that, and then its ability to sort of stay with you chronically. When I'm getting in a cryo chamber or I'm doing a cold plunge or I'm doing any of these things that are designed to kind of give that fight or flight response, I'm releasing cortisol, I'm assuming, because I'm fight or flighting, right? But how is that good for me? Because I thought that we are all about the like, no, we don't want that. We need less of that. In our everyday life, we're experiencing fight or flight when we shouldn't be. And this is the chronic stress level and anxiety and mental health things that people are seeing. So, why am I doing this to myself on purpose?
I'm going to give you a new buzzword. Are you ready? This
I'm
one's
so
going to
ready.
be very popular in 2025. I'm positive, and you got to give me credit, Rach. You heard it here first, okay? All right. So the term that we are going to start hearing a lot about is called hormesis. So hormesis, hormesis. And that is how all of these therapies really work. So hormesis, if you were to sort of very simply describe it, it is just enough stress, not too much. So hormesis is just enough stress, not too much. And so I use exercise as a perfect example of hormesis. We know if you don't exercise, you are sedentary, things go sideways, right? We get diseases like overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic uh, problems, cardiovascular disease, all the other diseases of our time. If you overexercise, you get injury and low energy availability and all the things that we know are detrimental to our body. But if you hit the sweet spot, just enough exercise, not too much, you are going to see changes in your body because you have stressed your body out just enough, not too much. But here's the thing, if I was to describe exercise to you, I would say, okay, Rachel, I'm going to have you do something that's going to raise your blood pressure, raise your core temperature, raise your heart rate, make you feel a little uncomfortable, make you sweat. You'd be like, thanks, pass, right?
So true.
But that is exactly what exercise does. And if we don't do that little bit of stress, then our body is not going to adapt and get stronger. And so these effects that you're talking about are having a really similar impact on your body. So if we look at something like cryotherapy, you get in, you're going to have that fight or flight response, your curve is going to go way up, and then you get out, and your body is essentially going to overcompensate for that stress response. So, if we think about cortisol, for example, which is also dramatically raised during exercise, when you exercise regularly, just enough, not too much, you're going to see that cortisol curve start to act appropriately, right? Which we see as a curve throughout the day. It's a circadian curve, right? So it rises in the morning and it falls throughout the day. Same thing is going to happen with these other therapies. Cryotherapy is a really good example because you can physically feel that sympathetic response so quickly. All of those fight or flight responses driving that sympathetic experience are then when you get out of the chamber or get out of the water, your body is going to overcompensate and you're going to be able to say, oh, I can take a big deep breath now. I am not feeling that super stress. And then over time, again, consistency is key, both with exercise as well as these other hormetic therapies that we're using. Over time, it helps you actually regulate that system because you are perfectly capable now of dealing with stress. It's almost a great way to practice in a low stakes environment dealing with stress that teaches your body, your brain, changes your physiology. So when real stress happens in your day to day, you have the coping mechanisms, both mentally and physically, to handle it.
That is a full stop for me. It's everything that I describe when I'm talking to athletes about the benefits of exercise and why it needs to be difficult, why we have to do hard things to prove that we can do hard things. And the difference that that makes in your everyday interactions is so immense. And when the exercise is not challenging, it really doesn't change you. And I'm not talking about physical, like, how big are my biceps? I'm talking about, the literal endorphins that are released and what you are able to take from that workout and bring out into your life. And it's Wow. Like I've never thought of cryo as mirroring that in such a similar way, but that's exactly, and you even used exercise as your example. That's incredible.
Hormesis, that's the word. 2025's word, hormesis. Just enough stress, not too much.
I'm giving it to
Exactly.
you. All the credit. All the credit.
I want to tap back
Um,
into this idea of inflammation though, because some stress is good, as we're talking about,
right.
and you actually, in some cases, don't want to blunt that stress. So, this is a really perfect opportunity where we're sort of meshing these ideas of exercise and these cold therapies to just think about one of the outcomes of exercise is actually going to be inflammation, right? So, we are acutely inducing inflammation. So different from chronic. Chronic is going to be you kind of have this low grade CRP that is not doing good things in your body. When you exercise, and so muscle has been the tissue that I've been studying for the last 20 years. When you exercise, your muscle is going to release inflammatory cytokines. It's going to be sending this signal to your immune system. I'm damaged. Come and fix me. And this is where we start to see some really important differences between cold water and cryotherapy, as well as timing of these two things. So, you're an athlete, right? If you've ever gotten injured before, let's say you took like a ball to the shin, or, like my sister was a field hockey player and they were constantly just getting like hammered by the sticks of their players or whatever. Um, and you get a bruise, right? You get this like big welt. The first thing that you do is put ice on it, right? And the reason that you put ice on it is to reduce swelling, to make sure that the inflammatory response doesn't overwhelm that particular, injury or site of injury. And this is really important to think about when we are exercising, particularly to your point, Rachel, when we're exercising hard and specifically with resistance training. So when we do resistance training, so this is strength training, moving weights around, a barbell, dumbbells, kettlebells, whatever. If we're doing something like that, we are intentionally damaging our muscles, right? And so by doing that, we are going to have this massive inflammatory response that is signaling to your immune system, I'm damaged, come fix me. If we blunt that response, what we're seeing in the literature now is that you actually reduce the amount of gains that you would have otherwise had from that exercise. Because essentially, like putting the ice on your injury, you're putting a veil in between that inflammation that's being released from your muscle and the immune system that needs to receive the signal. So if we, which is very common practice right now, do a very heavy lift and then immediately get into the cold plunge, what we see is that that can be very impairing to that recovery response. And you actually are not going to receive all of the gains that you would have from that very intense session. You're not going to lose everything, but you're just not going to optimize that outcome, which, like, this is an easy fix, right? So what we say is that if you're going to cold plunge, and I'm specifically talking about cold plunge right now, you want to make sure that you don't do it after an intense exercise session. And you probably wait somewhere between 36 and 48 hours after that intense session, or do it before and probably a couple of hours before, right? This is not true for cryotherapy. This is fascinating. Remember that I told you in the very beginning that one of the mechanisms of cold water immersion is to cool your core temperature, right? What we're seeing is that cold core temperature or cooler core temperature is what is probably causing that reduction in inflammatory response. We don't see that quite so much with cryotherapy. Now, again, early days, but there was a pretty solid meta analysis that looked at these different therapies back to back and took all of the research and kind of like mixed it together so that they redid the analysis. And what they found was that for cryotherapy, if you did it either close to or immediately after, it actually seemed to have beneficial effects on power on the next session of exercise. That was done in a lab, so it's tough to say whether or not this is going to hold true in the field. But it does seem to be that reduction in core temperature is really problematic around these intense exercise sessions. So the rule of thumb that I typically give to people is just don't get super cold after an intense exercise session. Wait a little bit or do it before.
That's really interesting because so much of the research surrounding, or I guess the benefit surrounding cold plunge is a reduction in muscle soreness. And we know that soreness is essentially a sign of adaptation and growth. Um, and on the surface, it looks like a great thing. Be less sore. That works for me. Then I can go, hit the next workout just as hard. Um, but that's really, really interesting to think that we need that response in order to see the full benefits. And that the reduction in soreness and and blunting that response, as you mentioned, is maybe not hacking it to the utmost level. For comfortability, it is, but maybe not for the gains. And we're all after the gains. Let's be honest.
Absolutely means. So you actually tap into something super important, and this research is actually paralleled in painkillers like NSAIDs, right? So something like Advil or ibuprofen. This data has been pretty well documented for probably a decade or two. Is a lot of people will take ibuprofen around their exercise in order to make sure that they don't get sore, because in their mind they're like, if I don't get sore, I can then go and do a harder workout later on. This data is mirrored almost exactly in these two spaces. So if you take a bunch of anti-inflammatories like an ibuprofen or a painkiller, you are also going to have this blunting effect of recovery and regeneration. And one population that this is really fascinating in is if you look at runners and you start to take a bunch of ibuprofen around your runs. Let's say you're training for a marathon and you're like, oh, my shins, hurt, or my quads hurt, or whatever. What we're actually finding is not only does it impair the recovery, but it can actually induce things like stress fractures because your body is not recovering appropriately.
Oh, wow.
Neither is your muscle is not recovering appropriately, your bones and your connective tissue. And so we actually really want to trust our bodies to remodel after this stress that we have put on it without impairing its ability to do so.
It's almost like it knows what it's doing.
It's a thing.
Quick interruption, guys. We are always talking about the importance of community to help you along your journey, to keep you motivated, to surround you with like minded people. And we have a massive, massive community to do just that. If you haven't already, get in our fitness group on Facebook, Fitness Programming by CVG. Get on our app, CVG Nation. We've got hundreds of thousands of women on there who are just waiting to cheer you on. And we cannot wait to meet you. Get with us on our channels. We love to see you there. You gave a little bit of an insight earlier to the kind of consistency that you need to have with cryotherapy in order to see the results that we're looking for. And I've even heard you say that twice a day is not too much for cryotherapy. However, we got to talk about it's not Poland, even though I might be just like, I might call that right in and see if I can, because that is an amazing, amazing response to a health benefit. It's like, oh, let's actually have insurance pay for that. Cryotherapy, how expensive is it? How accessible is it for most people because as you mentioned, it's got to be consistent. The one-off once a year is not going to really give you what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think this is honestly where cold plunge kind of like beats out cryotherapy, right? So if you've got, you're in New England and you've got a river or a lake behind your house and you can just get in it at any time of the day, or the ocean, right? It is practically 100% accessible, right? Like anybody can go and dunk themselves into a cold water space. And this is where, with cryotherapy, you need a chamber, you need either a studio, or now there's some models that you can put into your house. but they're not cheap, right? And so this is a barrier of especially access and, as you point out, consistency. The good thing at Restore is that we've got some great memberships that you can come in and, you can use the therapies fairly consistently at not an incredibly expensive price, but it is a barrier to be acknowledged. Is on average, I would say you're probably going to spend, depending on where you go, somewhere between $30 and $60 per session. And, I think one of the things that I would just sort of level set on a little bit is if you're going to go to a yoga class anymore, you're going to spend $30 to go to a yoga or a Pilates class or something like that, right? So it's on par with a lot of these other therapies and sessions that we're using. But yeah, it's definitely something to consider as you try to figure out which therapy is best for you.
I really like that you presented the completely accessible and free alternative. But I also really like the thinking about, where we want to spend our hard-earned dollars and what is worth it. And maybe not hesitating at going out to eat at that price, or, some of the other health things that we do, and just thinking about it in terms of longevity and all of the immune responses that we talked about. Like, we can really be hitting on something important here that it might be, for some people, worth looking into budgeting and allocating some funds towards,
Yeah.
because
And as you think about allocating to at Restore, as well as some of our competitor businesses, you can use HSA or FSA funds. So this is the funds that you can put aside in your paycheck that are non-taxable. So this is a place that you can use those funds as well. So if you are thinking about how to budget it, maybe you save that 30% that you otherwise would have sent to the government, and you take it to a studio and you get your cryotherapy. So
oh,
that's a
I
way
love that
to
you said
reallocate
that.
those funds. Yeah.
Yes, I love that you said that. That's fantastic. Um, I want to ask you, because at Restore, there's so many, and you are doing so much research on different therapies to enhance recovery and wellness. Cryotherapy is not the only card in the bunch. Um, but if you could make one of the therapies mandatory for every person on earth, they had to get it once a week, what would it be?
So I do love cryo, and I think that a lot of people see a ton of benefit from cryo. But if I'm going to be really honest, I think sauna is the way to go. So maybe, Rachel, you might not come in for the freezing cold therapies, but you might come in for the super hot therapies. So we have infrared saunas at our studio, and this is a therapy that has been pretty well researched in the recovery space, in the mental health space. There's a lot of work being done here. And it takes a lot longer, right? So when you get into a sauna, it's anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour. So you got to allocate some time. But again, we see this is what we call an exercise mimetic. So basically, it does everything that exercise does in your body, minus the calorie burning, right? So increased core temperature, increased blood pressure, increased sympathetic response, all of these things, cortisol is going to go up. All of these things are going to happen in a sauna. And unlike cryotherapy, what you get in and you're like, having this massive sympathetic surge. If you've ever been in a sauna, you can just get in and like take a big deep breath and relax. So again, that relaxation response instantly in the sauna is really beneficial. And so I would say if there's one thing, if you wanted to get in and do this one therapy, I would say sauna once a week is probably going to be really good for you. And this data is pretty well established when we look at population level data. There's all this science that is, epidemiological data looking in Finland and in Scandinavian countries. And they see the more you get into a sauna, in their case, it's a dry finish sauna. You see these beneficial effects for cardiovascular disease, for mental health, for longevity. When we look at infrared sauna, a lot of the hospital based studies are done with a machine called a Heckle machine, which is like a medical grade sauna. It's an infrared sauna. We're seeing really impactful effects on major depressive disorder, anxiety. We at Restore actually have this really, really awesome partnership with a lab at Mass General, Harvard Medical School. The lab is so cool. It's run by Simi Foster and uh, Maren Nair, and it's called the Hot and Cool Lab. And so they're doing a study right now looking at sauna. So they're going to use our saunas, hot yoga, and a therapy that is kind of like a sham placebo. It's like an app, um, to see if it has benefits on mental health and major depressive disorder. And, I think our hypothesis is that we will see benefit in the heated versions. I'm super intrigued in this study to see if there's a difference between exercising in the hot and just relaxing in the hot. So I put my exercise physiology hat on here, which I'm really excited about. Um, but I think the other thing that you're tapping into that's really important is what's your goal, when you're looking at choosing a therapy. So, another study that we're doing right now, also with MGH and Harvard, is looking at COVID, long COVID, and we're actually putting people into the cryo chambers to start to affect their um, peripheral outcomes that they have. So all these, autonomic responses that they're
Mhm.
having, things like tingling in their hands, migraines, POTS. And so there's a theory that the cold can kind of like help to reset that. So I love a good sauna, so I'm a little bit biased, but cryotherapy is also really beneficial. And it really depends on what the outcome that you're looking for is.
Good answer. That is a great answer. We always are talking about, what is superior, what is the best, and it really is what is the best for you. And
Exactly.
we all are looking for different, all of our lists are different on what we want, and that is such a good answer. Um I have to add this real quick because you brought it up, and I'm selfish and I personally want to know. We've had a lot of studies, and like it's a really hot practice right now of going from the hot to the cold. So okay, so we're going to sauna, we're going to cold plunge, and we've seen people incorporate some of this at their houses. With regards to going in to restore, are we wanting to, is the ultimate like sitting in the sauna and then cryo? Is that like, should I do that?
Yeah. So what you're describing is what we call contrast therapy, right? So this is the hot to the cold, to the hot to the cold. One of the things that's really hard to do with a cryotherapy chamber is back and forth contrast therapy. And the reason goes back to the frigid cold temperatures. So if you get out of the sauna and you're super sweaty, you get into the cryotherapy chamber, that sweat is going to freeze instantly, and it can, at the worst it can be uncomfortable or sorry, the best it can be uncomfortable. At the worst it can cause like freezer burn on your skin. So we actually don't do that at Restore. We go the opposite direction. So we would start in cryo, get into your infrared sauna. And then in every single one of our studios, we have a shower right next to our infrared sauna. So the way that we then add one last cold is to get into a cold shower after. So you go cryo, sauna, cold shower. Um, if you go to some of these water based places, like it's really easy to jump back and forth between the hot and the cold water or the sauna. Um, I would say this therapy has been used fairly consistently in physical therapy practices. That's probably where we see the most data on, if you've got some kind of an injury, going back and forth to the hot and cold can be beneficial. As far as contrast therapy, for all of the things and all of the claims that are being made about it for longevity, for recovery, for mental health, there's actually almost no data on contrast therapy specifically. I will say, as somebody that practices this and does this, it makes me feel really good. And so, as we say in our world, in the science world, like the placebo effect is an effect too. So maybe it's
Sure
just
is.
that the back and forth just makes me feel like $1 million. And so I'm going to keep doing it because I really like it. But that is definitely something that we need to investigate more because people are doing it, as you describe, all over the place, whether it's cryo and sauna or the different water therapies. So I think there definitely needs to be more data on what's going on between the hot and cold back and forth.
I always have trouble with the idea that I have to end with the cold. That's where I get stopped on the contrast therapy.
Well, you
Like, can
want to know
I
what
end
I
with the
do?
hot
You want to
though?
know what I do? This is what I do. I go from the cold therapies that we have, and I actually finish in our red light room. So, red light also super hot right now.
Super hot.
Um, yeah, there's some good data in red light therapy for skin, right? So
Mm,
that's probably where the best data comes from. It is most of the data is in lasers, and most of the ways that we are using red light in our spaces right now are LED lights. So there's some teasing out that needs to go on there as to is the LED as effective as the laser that you might get from your dermatologist
right.
or a cosmetic dermatologist when they go in and do the red light on your face. Intensity of light really matters. So a lot of these like crazy masks that you see that you can buy off Instagram that are being, advertised to you everywhere, they're probably not intense enough to have a dramatic effect on your skin because they don't penetrate deep enough. But to your point of if I don't want to end on the cold, I will stand in front of our panels for 10, 15 minutes. It heats me back up. There's some data to show that it can be beneficial for mitochondrial health, maybe some recovery, but certainly for skin. So I'm like, hey, I get warm, I get my wrinkles taken care of. I'm a happy girl.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Bonus question. Rachel, when you get in the cryo chamber, what song's pumping?
So typically it is Sia, Unstoppable.
Oh, love it.
I'll tell you why. That song, first of all, I just love that song, right? Like I'm a Porsche with no brakes, thank you. But it's also almost exactly 3 minutes long. So I get through the whole song in one shot.
Oh, I love it. I want to give you an opportunity to let our listeners know where they can hear more from you, where they can get more information on this. Because there are a ton of, I have one near me. There are a ton of options with regards to Restore. They have so many locations. And where can our listeners hear a little bit more of your research and how you are leading this field?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for setting it up that way. So, if you want a little bit more science communication, just sort of general health longevity stuff, you can follow me on the socials. So I'm at Rachel Pojednic. You'll have to put it in the show notes
I'll
because
link it. I'll link it.
a little bit tricky. If you want to find me on the internet, my website is also rachelpojednic.com. You can also find my courses at strongprocess.com. If you're looking for me at Restore and our work that we're doing there, you can go to restore.com/restore labs. So that's actually our official lab. It's called Restore Labs. And you can find all of the science that we are doing in the space in a really easy to understand and clickable way on that website.
Thank you. Thank you for bridging that gap. I know so many people are so curious about these biohacking techniques and they want to know more and they just want it to be digestible. So, we appreciate you taking the time today. It's been so informative. And I think I'm going to do it, Rachel. I think I'm going to call up. I think I'm going to get cold because I like the way that you described it as different from the cold water therapy because I feel I've tried that. I can't do it consistently. I can't do it consistently. But I think you sold me.
Amazing. Sia Unstoppable. It will really help.
Let's
And
go.
finish it off with some red light. It'll make you feel good.
Oh, I love it. All right, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. And all of her information will be in the show notes. Check her out. She is doing some amazing things in the health space. Thanks.